Hi YouTube. This is the continued video of repairing this engine for the cracked piston. Just go through what's happened here. So the last video, the head was off and everything, the oil pan to access the piston rod assembly. So that was removed. I originally was going to replace the piston with a new piston. But when I got that piston in the mail, it was a little bit larger size than the original, and I didn't want to get into honing the single cylinder to size it to fit. So I ended up getting a used piston rod assembly, and that's back in there. I used Felpro head gasket to put that back together. I ended up using the updated one. The original style is a Felpro Printo seal, and they're still available on eBay for really cheap. But I don't remember hearing good things about those types of gaskets, so I went with the upgraded Felpro. I could put the part number in the description later. So got that, everything clean, a lot of prep for this. Everything clean and prepped. And to put the cylinder head on, I had another one of these lifting hooks that goes onto the back of the cylinder head. I had another one of those that I put on the front to be able to lift the head. And I originally put that one facing opposite, and then had the front one facing up top to offset the weight. But then when I went to set it on, that didn't clear the firewall. So I ended up just grabbing the head in the rear and using the lifting hook in the front to put that in place. That worked out good. I also ended up buying a set of new head bolts just to avoid the risk factor with reusing the original ones. They come with the sealant on them, and I just put a skim coat of pipe dope on the threads before I installed them. And I ended up torquing those to 95 foot-pound. When you go to research that, there's a lot of different torque specs that get thrown out and ways to do it. Going by my feel and the judgment, I wasn't comfortable going over 95. But what I did do was, after I torqued them, I let that sit for a couple hours while I buttoned up the oil pan underneath. And then I retorqued them again, and they did take a little bit more torque after a couple hours of compressing that gasket. So I recommend that, because you can't retorque them after the engine's run unless you want to tear the whole thing back apart. So the injectors are rebuilt except for one on each side. The pintle needle was stuck, so I'm waiting to get a couple of those used and see if I can get them in spec. The other thing, with the manifold attached and laying the head down, one of the manifold studs went through the pipe there, and I can't get the pipe around the stud to fit it to the manifold, so I have to undo the clamps. I'm going to try to undo the clamps on the exhaust system. There's one by the muffler and maybe one by the tailpipe, and see if I can get enough movement to get that around that manifold stud to fit that. Other than that, I believe everything's fitted underneath. I used right stuff on the oil pan and on the valve covers. Did not use gaskets, and they did not have gaskets on them when I took it apart. So I put a short bead on them, and if I were to do this again, I would probably put more of a skim coat, because I was careful to put my bead biased to the outer edge so that the squeeze would go outside instead of inside. Because if you get silicone or any of this stuff into your oil pump in chunks, it will clog it and possibly cause a oil pressure issue. So hopefully all of my squeeze is to the outside. But if I were to do this again, I would go for less of a bead and just a thicker skim coat, so there wouldn't be as much liability with what squeezes. You see those intake gaskets are installed. The crossover is on. And I just got done watching my previous videos. That was actually good to have the notes on removing the intake and the alternator bracket and the way the wires and the ground cables bolted to different things and the order of the intake bolts. So that's in previous video. That's actually really good, even just for intake removal to reference, in case yours ends up being a part longer or you didn't keep your stuff in order. So unless I did something out of order here and I have to go over it, the next step should be to lay this intake on and put the alternator and all the final touches in it and see what it's going to do. Well, after I get the injectors in there, and I'd have to do the little bypass lines also. And there's probably some other small stuff, but this is definitely the hard work's done. And it all went smooth. Biggest hang up would be that manifold stud interfering with me putting the exhaust pipe on. Other than that, everything went fairly smooth. Definitely a lot of time and definitely dirty process. It was covered in grease yesterday doing this. So hopefully the next video will be this together and running well. So we'll wait to see that. Thanks for watching.